In March of 1847, workers demolishing the abandoned Blackthorn Manor in rural Ashford, Massachusetts made a discovery that would haunt the small farming community for generations. Beneath the cellar floorboards, they uncovered a mass grave containing the remains of 23 individuals, their bodies bearing unmistakable signs of surgical mutilation. What the local authorities tried to suppress for nearly 2 decades would eventually reveal one of the most systematic and horrifying medical crimes in American history. Between 1839 and 1847, over 87 people vanished without explanation in and around Ashford County. These weren't random disappearances of drifters or criminals, but deliberate selections of vulnerable souls who had placed their trust in what appeared to be a respectable medical practice. The Blackthorn family had built their reputation as skilled physicians and compassionate healers, drawing patients from across 3 counties to their isolated manor house that doubled as both residence and medical facility. Dr. Silas Blackthorn had arrived in Ashford in 1838, presenting credentials from Harvard Medical School and carrying letters of recommendation from prominent Boston physicians. At 34, he possessed the kind of refined bearing and educated speech that immediately elevated him in the eyes of the rural community. His wife Constance, a striking woman with keen business acumen, managed the practical aspects of their medical practice while maintaining the social connections essential to their growing reputation. Before we descend deeper into this tale of medical horror, understand that this story isn't for everyone. Only those brave enough to confront the darkest chapters of New England's hidden history should continue. If you're ready to join our community of truth seekers who dare to uncover these buried secrets, hit that subscribe button and let us know in the comments what state you're listening from. We're building a global network of people who refuse to let these stories remain forgotten. The Blackthorn children, twin sons Marcus and Theodore aged 16, and daughter Helena aged 14, had been raised with an unsettling familiarity around death and suffering. Neighbors would later recall how unnaturally calm the children remained during medical emergencies, displaying a clinical detachment that seemed far beyond their years. Local residents attributed this composure to their extensive exposure to their father's medical practice, never suspecting the true nature of their education. The family's manor stood on 43 acres of isolated farmland, positioned strategically at the intersection of 3 county roads. This location allowed them to serve patients from multiple jurisdictions while avoiding the scrutiny that might have come from operating within any single town's boundaries. The building itself had been modified extensively, with additional rooms constructed in the basement level that the family claimed were necessary for medical storage and preparation of medicines. Warning signs had been accumulating for years, though the scattered nature of the evidence and the family's careful manipulation of records prevented any coordinated investigation. Patients who arrived at the Blackthorn Manor for treatment showed a disturbing tendency to either recover completely or disappear entirely, with very few cases of partial recovery or extended treatment periods. This unusual pattern should have raised questions among medical professionals, but the isolated nature of rural practice and the family's prestigious credentials shielded them from suspicion. The economic depression of the late 1830s had created ideal conditions for the Blackthorn operation. Desperate families were willing to travel great distances for affordable medical care, often bringing their most vulnerable members to what they believed was a sanctuary of healing. The family specifically advertised their services to those suffering from consumption, kidney ailments, and other chronic conditions that typically required extended treatment periods. County records from the period show an unusual number of property transfers involving the estates of patients who had sought treatment at the Blackthorn Manor. In case after case, families would report that their relatives had died during treatment and been buried in the manor's private cemetery, only to later discover that their loved one's property had been quietly transferred to creditors or buyers with suspicious connections to the Blackthorn family's financial network. Dr. Blackthorn maintained extensive correspondence with medical suppliers throughout New England and as far south as Philadelphia, ordering quantities of surgical instruments and preservation materials far exceeding what any legitimate rural practice could require. His letters, later recovered from various suppliers, revealed a sophisticated understanding of anatomy and surgical techniques that extended well beyond general medical practice into areas more commonly associated with medical schools and research institutions. The family's social standing in the community remained unshakable despite these accumulating irregularities. Dr. Blackthorne served on the county medical board and regularly attended church services with his family, presenting the image of moral rectitude that made accusations against him seem not only unlikely but almost blasphemous. Constance Blackthorne organized charity drives for local orphans and maintained friendships with the wives of prominent citizens, using these connections to gather information about potential patients and their financial circumstances. As winter turned to spring in 1847, the Blackthorne family's 8-year reign of systematic murder was finally approaching its end. The accumulating weight of missing persons reports, suspicious property transfers, and medical irregularities had begun to attract the attention of county authorities who could no longer ignore the pattern of disappearances surrounding the family's practice. What they would discover in the coming months would not only shock the local community but also expose a network of corruption and complicity that reached into the highest levels of regional authority, forever changing how medical practice would be regulated and monitored in rural New England. The Blackthorne family's journey to Ashford County began not with medical ambition, but with financial desperation that would ultimately corrupt their souls beyond redemption. Silas Blackthorne had graduated from Harvard Medical School in 1835 with exceptional academic credentials but crushing debt that threatened to destroy his future before it began. His medical education had cost his family their ancestral property in Connecticut, and the young doctor found himself owing substantial sums to both the university and private creditors who had funded his studies. Constance Whitmore had married Silas in 1836, bringing her own burden of financial obligation. Her father's textile business had collapsed during the economic uncertainties of the mid-1830s, leaving the family bankrupt and socially disgraced. The marriage between Silas and Constance represented not romantic love, but a calculated alliance between two individuals whose circumstances demanded innovative solutions to seemingly insurmountable problems. Their early attempts at establishing a medical practice in more populated areas had failed catastrophically. Silas lacked the social connections necessary to build a patient base among Boston's established families, while his debts made it impossible to maintain the kind of elegant office space that wealthy patients expected. After 18 months of struggle, the couple had exhausted their resources and faced the prospect of debtor's prison or worse. The decision to relocate to rural Ashford County emerged from careful research into communities that desperately needed medical services but lacked the sophistication to investigate credentials thoroughly. Constance had identified Ashford through correspondence with textile suppliers who described a prosperous farming region with only one aging physician serving 3 townships. The isolation that initially attracted them would later prove essential to concealing their crimes. Using forged letters of recommendation and borrowed money for travel expenses, the Blackthornes arrived in Ashford in late 1838 with their 3 young children and a carefully constructed story of seeking peaceful rural practice after tiring of Boston's competitive medical environment. The local physician, Dr. Edmund Hartwell, was 72 years old and welcomed the prospect of sharing his overwhelming caseload with a younger colleague. The family's integration into community life proceeded with calculated precision. Silas demonstrated impressive medical knowledge in treating routine cases, quickly building trust among local families who had grown accustomed to traveling great distances for competent medical care. Constance established herself as a refined lady who brought Boston sophistication to local social gatherings while remaining appropriately humble about their circumstances. Within 6 months, the Blackthornes had purchased their manor property using a complex arrangement of promissory notes and agreements that disguised their actual financial situation. The previous owner, a widower eager to relocate closer to his children, accepted terms that would later prove impossible to fulfill through legitimate medical practice income. This financial pressure would soon drive the family toward their first experimental ventures into medical fraud. The children adapted to their new environment with disturbing ease. Marcus and Theodore, now 10 years old, showed remarkable aptitude for their father's medical discussions and began assisting with patient care in ways that exceeded normal childhood curiosity. 8-year-old Helena demonstrated an unsettling fascination with anatomical specimens and surgical instruments, often spending hours in her father's study examining medical texts that would disturb most adults. Dr. Hartwell's sudden death from apoplexy in spring 1839 eliminated the only potential professional oversight of the blackthorn practice. The timing proved remarkably convenient, occurring just as Silas had begun implementing more aggressive treatment protocols that might have raised questions among experienced medical practitioners. With Hartwell gone, the Blackthorns became the sole medical authority for the entire region. If this story is already giving you chills, share this video with a friend who loves dark historical mysteries. Hit that like button to support our investigation into America's hidden past, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss stories like this one. We're uncovering the truth that others tried to bury. The family's first systematic crime occurred in June 1839, when a traveling merchant named Isaiah Porter arrived seeking treatment for severe abdominal pain. Porter carried substantial cash from successful trading ventures and had mentioned to several locals that he planned to purchase property in the area. His sudden death during what Silas described as routine surgery provided both the family's first victim and their initial taste of the profits that murder could provide. Porter's belongings, including nearly $400 in gold coins, disappeared along with his body. Official records showed that he had been buried in the manor's private cemetery, but when his business associates later investigated, they found only an empty grave and forged documentation of his death. The money allowed the Blackthorns to make their first substantial payment on the manor property and begin the basement modifications that would later accommodate their expanded operations. The success of the Porter murder transformed the Blackthorn family from desperate debtors into calculating predators who discovered that human life could be converted into substantial profit with minimal risk. The $400 stolen from the traveling merchant represented more money than their legitimate medical practice earned in 6 months, a revelation that fundamentally altered their moral compass and operational priorities. Silas began developing systematic methods for identifying ideal victims, focusing on individuals who possessed 3 critical characteristics: significant portable wealth, minimal local connections, and medical conditions that could plausibly result in sudden death during treatment. His medical training provided the perfect cover for these murders, as his professional authority made questioning his diagnoses or treatment decisions virtually impossible for the uneducated farming families who comprised most of his patient base. The basement modifications commenced in late 1839, ostensibly to create additional storage space for medical supplies and preparation areas for complex surgical procedures. In reality, Silas was constructing a specialized facility designed for systematic murder and body disposal. The underground chambers included a surgical suite equipped with restraints disguised as medical apparatus, preservation tanks for organ storage, and a sophisticated ventilation system that prevented suspicious odors from reaching the main floors of the manor. Constance assumed responsibility for victim selection and initial contact, using her social connections and charitable activities to identify potential targets throughout the region. She developed an extensive network of informants including innkeepers, shopkeepers, and church officials who unknowingly provided information about travelers, wealthy widows, and families experiencing medical crises. Her refined manner and apparent compassion made people eager to confide in her about their circumstances and financial situations. The children's education took on increasingly sinister dimensions as they were gradually introduced to the family's true source of income. Marcus and Theodore, now 11 years old, began assisting with patient intake procedures and learned to identify valuable possessions that victims might be carrying. Helena, despite her young age, demonstrated remarkable aptitude for maintaining false medical records and creating documentation that supported their parents' fabricated explanations for patient deaths. By autumn 1839, the family had perfected their operational methodology. Potential victims were identified through Constance's intelligence network, then lured to the manor through carefully crafted medical advertisements or personal recommendations from trusted community members. Once patients arrived for treatment, they were isolated from outside contact while Silas conducted thorough assessments of their wealth and social connections. The murder process itself varied depending on the victim's specific circumstances, but typically involved administration of what patients believed were therapeutic medications. Silas had developed expertise in using various poisons and surgical techniques that could simulate natural death from medical complications. His Harvard training provided the anatomical knowledge necessary to extract valuable organs and tissues for sale to medical schools and research institutions throughout New England. Body disposal presented the greatest logistical challenge, but the family developed multiple solutions depending on seasonal conditions and victim characteristics. Some bodies were dissolved using chemical processes Silas had learned during his medical studies, while others were buried in remote locations throughout their extensive property. The most valuable corpses were preserved for sale to medical institutions that paid premium prices for fresh anatomical specimens. The financial rewards proved substantial and immediately addictive. Each successful murder generated between $200 and $800 in combined cash, possessions, and organ sales, representing more profit than their legitimate medical practice could produce in an entire year. This economic incentive drove the family to increase their operational tempo throughout 1840, targeting an average of one victim per month during peak travel seasons. Victim selection criteria became increasingly sophisticated as the family gained experience and confidence. They learned to avoid patients with strong family connections or business associates who might investigate disappearances too aggressively. Instead, they focused on isolated individuals such as elderly widows seeking treatment for chronic conditions, traveling merchants without established routes, and immigrants with limited English skills who were unlikely to be missed quickly. The psychological transformation of the family members proved as systematic as their criminal methodology. Silas began viewing patients not as human beings requiring medical care, but as potential sources of profit to be evaluated and harvested. Constance developed remarkable skills in emotional manipulation, using her apparent empathy and concern to lower victims' defenses while gathering intelligence about their resources and connections. The children adapted to their new reality with disturbing normalcy, accepting murder and theft as routine family activities no different from farming or any other profession. Their education continued to emphasize practical skills such as record falsification, property evaluation, and witness manipulation, preparing them to eventually assume greater responsibilities within the family operation as they matured into full partnership. By 1841, the Blackthorne family had refined their murderous enterprise into a sophisticated operation that combined medical expertise with ruthless business acumen. Their success during the previous 2 years had generated substantial profits while maintaining their respectable facade, but Silas recognized that continued growth required systematic improvements to their victim selection process and operational security measures. The development of specialized victim categories became central to their evolving methodology. Silas created detailed profiles for different types of targets, each requiring specific approaches and offering distinct advantages. Wealthy widows represented their most profitable category, typically carrying substantial cash or jewelry while possessing minimal family connections that might trigger investigations. These women often sought treatment for chronic conditions, providing natural explanations for extended stays that could last several weeks before their inevitable deaths. Traveling merchants comprised their second most valuable target group, particularly those engaged in seasonal trade routes through rural New England. These individuals carried significant portable wealth and often operated independently without business partners who might investigate delayed arrivals at scheduled destinations. Silas learned to time these murders carefully, ensuring that victims disappeared during periods when their absence would be attributed to normal variations in travel schedules. The family also began targeting consumptive patients whose chronic conditions made sudden death during treatment medically plausible. These victims might possess less immediate wealth than merchants or widows, but their prolonged illnesses provided extended opportunities to extract money through fraudulent medical expenses before administering final treatments. Families desperate to save dying relatives proved remarkably willing to transfer property and liquidate assets to fund continued care. Constance expanded her intelligence-gathering operations throughout 1841, establishing informal relationships with postmasters, innkeepers, and church officials across 3 counties. Her charitable activities provided perfect cover for these investigations, as her apparent concern for community welfare made people eager to share information about neighbors experiencing medical or financial difficulties. She maintained detailed records of potential victims, tracking their movements, resources, and social connections with methodical precision. The basement facility underwent continuous improvements as the family's operational requirements evolved. Silas installed additional surgical equipment obtained through his medical supply contacts, creating capabilities that rivaled those of established medical schools. The preservation chambers were expanded to accommodate multiple bodies simultaneously, allowing them to process organs and specimens more efficiently during peak operational periods. Organ trafficking emerged as their most lucrative revenue stream, generating profits that exceeded simple theft by substantial margins. Medical schools throughout New England and the Mid-Atlantic states paid premium prices for fresh anatomical specimens, particularly if they included specific organs or tissue samples required for research projects. Silas developed an extensive correspondence network with anatomy professors and medical researchers who remained willfully ignorant of his specimen sources while eagerly purchasing his products. The children's roles within the family operation continued expanding as they matured and demonstrated increased competence in criminal activities. Marcus and Theodore, now 13 years old, assumed responsibility for initial victim assessment and security monitoring during treatment periods. Their apparent innocence made them ideal for gathering intelligence about victim resources and social connections without arousing suspicion among patients or community members. Helena, despite being only 11 years old, showed remarkable aptitude for financial record manipulation and property transfer documentation. Her childish appearance provided perfect cover for delivering forged documents and conducting business transactions that might seem suspicious if performed by adult family members. She learned to forge signatures with professional precision and developed expertise in legal terminology that exceeded many trained clerks. The family's legitimate medical practice served increasingly as a front operation designed to maintain their community standing while providing cover for their criminal activities. Silas continued treating routine cases competently enough to preserve his professional reputation, but devoted most of his energy and resources to identifying and processing murder victims. Patient fees from legitimate cases barely covered operational expenses, while murder profits funded their expanding lifestyle and criminal infrastructure. Victim processing procedures became standardized through trial and error, with specific protocols for different categories of targets. Wealthy patients received extended treatment periods that maximized opportunities for asset extraction before murder, while less valuable victims were dispatched quickly to minimize operational risks. Bodies were processed systematically to extract maximum value from organs, tissues, and specimens before disposal through increasingly sophisticated methods. The psychological impact of systematic murder on family dynamics proved complex and disturbing. Rather than developing guilt or moral reservations, the Blackthorns experienced increasing pride in their criminal efficiency and professional competence. They viewed their operation as a successful business enterprise that demonstrated superior intelligence and adaptability compared to their law-abiding neighbors who struggled with conventional economic challenges throughout the ongoing Depression. The years 1843 and 1844 marked the absolute peak of the Blackthorn family's murderous enterprise, a period when their operation achieved industrial efficiency that would have impressed legitimate business owners throughout New England. During these 24 months, they processed an average of 4 victims per month while maintaining such careful operational security that not a single investigation was launched by local authorities. Their success had transformed the modest rural manor into a sophisticated criminal headquarters that rivaled the organizational complexity of major commercial enterprises. Silas had established regular supply chains with medical institutions from Boston to Philadelphia, creating demand for anatomical specimens that guaranteed steady revenue regardless of seasonal variations in victim availability. His reputation among anatomy professors had grown to the point where research institutions competed for access to his consistently high-quality products. The family's wealth accumulation during this period proved staggering by rural standards. Conservative estimates suggest they generated over $12,000 annually through their combined murder, theft, and organ trafficking activities, representing more than 20 times the income of successful farming families in the region. This financial success allowed them to expand their operation while maintaining the charitable activities and community involvement that preserved their sterling reputation. Constance had perfected the art of victim recruitment through an elaborate network of accomplices who remained largely unaware of their true role in facilitating murder. She maintained correspondence with innkeepers, shopkeepers, and even clergy members throughout New England, offering to provide medical referrals for travelers or community members seeking specialized treatment. These well-meaning individuals unknowingly became talent scouts for a murder operation, identifying potential victims and directing them toward the Blackthorn Manor. The basement facility had evolved into a medical complex that exceeded the capabilities of most established hospitals. Multiple surgical suites allowed for simultaneous processing of different victims, while advanced preservation equipment maintained organ viability for extended periods. Silas had even installed a primitive refrigeration system using ice harvested from nearby ponds, extending the marketing window for perishable anatomical specimens and significantly increasing their profit margins. Victim processing had become so efficient that the family could complete an entire murder cycle from initial contact through final disposal within 72 hours for routine cases. Wealthy victims might require extended manipulation periods to extract maximum assets, but standard targets could be identified, lured, murdered, processed, and disposed of with assembler line precision that minimized exposure risks while maximizing operational throughput. The children had matured into full criminal partners whose contributions proved essential to operational success. Marcus and Theodore, now 15 years old, possessed medical knowledge and surgical skills that rivaled many graduated physicians. They could perform complex anatomical dissections independently and had developed expertise in organ preservation techniques that exceeded their father's capabilities in several specialized areas. Helena, at 13, had become the family's financial mastermind and primary intelligence coordinator. Her innocent appearance provided perfect cover for conducting banking transactions, property transfers, and business negotiations that would arouse suspicion if performed by adult family members. She maintained detailed records of victim assets, market prices for various organs, and operational expenses with accounting precision that would have impressed professional bookkeepers. The psychological transformation of the family reached its most disturbing expression during this peak period. They had developed a twisted pride in their criminal efficiency and began viewing themselves as superior beings whose intelligence and adaptability elevated them above conventional moral constraints. Dinner conversations often included technical discussions of murder techniques, organ market prices, and victim selection strategies with the casual tone that normal families might use when discussing weather or crops. Their social standing in the community reached unprecedented heights during 1844, as their apparent wealth and generous charitable contributions earned widespread admiration and respect. Silas served on multiple civic committees and was frequently consulted on matters ranging from public health to economic development. Constance organized ladies' auxiliary activities and sponsored community events that enhanced the family's reputation while providing additional opportunities for victim identification. If you're finding this systematic horror as chilling as we are, share this investigation with someone who appreciates dark historical mysteries. Hit that like button to support our research into these buried secrets, and make sure you're subscribed with notifications on so you never miss these shocking revelations. We're building a community of truth seekers who refuse to let these stories remain hidden. The family's operational confidence had grown to the point where they began taking increasingly bold risks, targeting victims with stronger community connections and processing multiple murders simultaneously. This hubris, born from years of unchallenged success, would soon create the conditions for their eventual downfall. But during 1844, the Blackthorn family stood at the absolute pinnacle of their criminal enterprise, operating what was arguably the most successful and sophisticated murder operation in American history. The first serious threat to the Blackthorn operation emerged in September 1844 when Dr. Jonathan Whitfield, a traveling physician from Hartford, arrived unexpectedly at the manor seeking professional consultation about a complex surgical case. Whitfield possessed the medical expertise to recognize the sophisticated equipment and anatomical specimens that Silas had accumulated, immediately raising questions about how a rural practice could afford such resources or require such capabilities. Silas managed to deflect Whitfield's initial inquiries by claiming he conducted research for Boston medical institutions, but the visiting physician's persistence and knowledge made him a substantial security risk. Whitfield expressed particular interest in the basement facilities and asked detailed questions about specimen sources that demonstrated his growing suspicions about the true nature of the Blackthorn practice. The family convened emergency meetings to address this unprecedented threat to their operational security. Previous challenges had involved uneducated locals who could be easily misled or intimidated, but Whitfield represented the first time they faced potential exposure by someone with the medical knowledge and professional connections to investigate their claims thoroughly. His continued presence in the area posed an existential threat to their entire enterprise. Constance developed an elaborate plan to discredit Whitfield while simultaneously eliminating him as a threat. She began spreading rumors about his mental instability and professional incompetence, using her extensive social network to undermine his credibility before he could present evidence of his suspicions to authorities. Meanwhile, the family prepared contingency plans for his murder if social manipulation proved insufficient to neutralize the danger he represented. The situation became critical when Whitfield attempted to examine patient records and question several community members about missing persons who had sought treatment at the Blackthorn Manor. His investigation threatened to uncover patterns that the family had carefully concealed for over 5 years, potentially exposing the full scope of their criminal operation to someone with the authority and expertise to pursue justice effectively. Silas ultimately resolved the crisis through a carefully planned murder that appeared to result from a riding accident. Whitfield's horse was drugged with substances that caused violent behavior, throwing the physician into a rocky ravine where his injuries could plausibly explain his death. The family's medical authority allowed them to conduct the examination and declare the death accidental, while Whitfield's belongings conveniently disappeared during the confusion following the incident. The Whitfield murder marked a significant escalation in the family's willingness to eliminate threats beyond their normal victim categories. Previous murders had targeted individuals selected for their vulnerability and wealth, but killing a respected physician required different techniques and created new risks that forced them to enhance their security measures and operational protocols. The family implemented extensive surveillance procedures throughout their property and expanded their intelligence network to monitor potential threats more systematically. Marcus and Theodore assumed responsibility for conducting reconnaissance activities, using their apparent innocence to gather information about visitors and community members who might pose security risks. They learned to identify law enforcement officials, traveling professionals, and other individuals who possessed the knowledge or authority to investigate the family's activities. Helena developed sophisticated systems for document destruction and evidence elimination that could be activated rapidly if investigations threatened their operation. She maintained duplicate records in multiple locations and created elaborate filing systems that allowed critical information to be located and destroyed within minutes of receiving warning about impending searches or inquiries. The family also established multiple escape routes and contingency plans for abandoning their operation if exposure became imminent. They maintained substantial cash reserves and portable assets that could support extended periods of flight, while developing alternative identities and documentation that would allow them to relocate and potentially resume their activities in different regions under new names. Despite these enhanced security measures, the Whitfield incident had shaken the family's confidence and forced them to acknowledge that their operation faced growing risks as their success attracted attention from increasingly sophisticated observers. The medical community's informal networks meant that Whitfield's disappearance might eventually trigger additional investigations by colleagues who shared his suspicions about the Blackthorn practice. The psychological impact of murdering a fellow physician proved particularly significant for Silas, who experienced the first serious doubts about the sustainability of their criminal enterprise. Killing patients and travelers had become routine, but murdering a professional peer forced him to confront the reality that their operation might eventually require them to eliminate anyone who posed a threat, regardless of their social standing or professional credentials. Operational tempo decreased significantly following the Whitfield murder as the family prioritized security over profit maximization. They became more selective in victim targeting and implemented extended surveillance periods before proceeding with murders, sacrificing efficiency to reduce exposure risks. This increased caution would prove prescient as additional threats to their operation began emerging throughout late 1844 and early 1845. The winter of 1845 brought an unprecedented convergence of suspicions that threatened to unravel the Blackthorn family's carefully constructed facade of respectability. Sheriff Benjamin Morrison had begun receiving an increasing number of missing persons reports from families whose relatives had last been seen traveling toward the Blackthorn Manor for medical treatment. What started as isolated inquiries gradually formed a pattern that even the most trusting rural lawman could no longer ignore. Morrison, a methodical man who had served as county sheriff for 12 years, initially dismissed these reports as typical cases of travelers changing their plans or dying from natural causes during medical treatment. However, the accumulating evidence suggested something far more sinister than routine mortality rates or communication failures between patients and their families scattered across multiple states. The formation of a citizens' committee marked the first organized response to the growing concerns about disappearances in the region. Led by Samuel Richardson, whose brother-in-law had vanished after seeking treatment for consumption at the Blackthorn Manor, the committee began collecting testimonies from families throughout New England who reported similar circumstances involving missing relatives. Richardson possessed the education and social standing necessary to coordinate an effective investigation. As a successful merchant with extensive business connections, he could communicate with law enforcement officials across state lines and had access to records that revealed the true scope of the disappearances. His methodical approach to gathering evidence posed the most serious threat the Blackthorn family had ever faced. The committee's investigation uncovered disturbing patterns in property transfers involving missing persons who had sought treatment from Dr. Blackthorn. In case after case, families discovered that their relatives' assets had been quietly liquidated or transferred to unknown parties shortly after their disappearances. These financial irregularities provided concrete evidence of criminal activity that transcended simple medical malpractice or natural death. The emergence of a key witness in February 1845 transformed the investigation from circumstantial suspicion into potential criminal prosecution. Martha Hendricks, a middle-aged seamstress from Worcester, had survived what she later described as an attempted murder at the Blackthorn Manor after escaping during what she believed was preparation for an unauthorized surgical procedure. Hendricks had sought treatment for chronic stomach pain and initially received what appeared to be standard medical care from Dr. Blackthorn. However, she became suspicious when the family insisted on extended isolation from outside contact and began asking detailed questions about her financial circumstances and family connections. Her decision to flee the manor during the night of February 15 potentially saved her life while providing the first eyewitness testimony about the family's criminal activities. Her account described sophisticated basement facilities that exceeded anything required for routine medical practice, including multiple surgical suites equipped with restraining devices and preservation equipment that suggested systematic body processing operations. Most damaging was her testimony about overhearing conversations between family members that explicitly discussed murder techniques and victim asset extraction methods. The family's response to these mounting threats revealed the full extent of their criminal sophistication and ruthless determination to preserve their operation at any cost. Rather than curtailing their activities or attempting to flee, they launched a coordinated campaign to discredit witnesses, intimidate investigators, and eliminate evidence that might support criminal charges. Constance utilized her extensive social network to spread rumors about Martha Hendricks' mental stability and moral character, suggesting that her accusations resulted from hysteria or vindictive motivations rather than actual experiences. The family's charitable contributions and community involvement provided substantial social capital that they deployed strategically to maintain public support while undermining their accusers' credibility. If this escalating investigation is keeping you on the edge of your seat, make sure to share this video with fellow true crime enthusiasts who appreciate these deep historical dives. Hit that like button to support our research into these forgotten cases, and subscribe with notifications turned on so you never miss when we uncover these buried secrets. Tell us in the comments what you think about this community's response to the growing evidence. Meanwhile, Marcus and Theodore began conducting surveillance operations against committee members and potential witnesses, gathering intelligence about their activities, schedules, and vulnerabilities. The brothers had developed remarkable skills in covert observation and information gathering that allowed them to monitor threats without detection while identifying opportunities for intimidation or elimination. Helena coordinated the systematic destruction of incriminating evidence, including patient records, financial documents, and correspondence that might support criminal charges. Her organizational abilities proved essential to eliminating the paper trail that connected the family to their victims while maintaining enough legitimate documentation to support their claims of operating a normal medical practice. The family also implemented more aggressive security measures around their property, including expanded surveillance systems and concealed weapons positioned throughout the manor. They prepared for the possibility of armed confrontation with law enforcement while maintaining escape routes that would allow them to flee if their position became untenable. Despite these defensive preparations, the accumulating weight of evidence and growing public pressure created an increasingly unstable situation that threatened to expose their entire operation. The family recognized that their 6-year reign of systematic murder was approaching a critical juncture that would determine whether they could preserve their criminal enterprise or face the justice that had eluded them for so long. Sheriff Morrison's investigation gained substantial momentum in March 1845 when he discovered a cache of personal belongings hidden in an abandoned barn 6 miles from the Blackthorn Manor. The items included jewelry, watches, and personal documents belonging to at least 17 different individuals who had been reported missing over the previous 4 years, providing the first concrete physical evidence linking the family to the disappearances. The discovery occurred when Morrison followed information provided by a local farmer who had noticed suspicious nighttime activity around the property. Inside the barn, investigators found carefully organized collections of valuables sorted by type and estimated worth, suggesting systematic theft operations rather than random criminal activity. Most disturbing were detailed inventory lists written in Helena Blackthorn's distinctive handwriting, documenting each item's source and potential market value. Morrison immediately recognized the significance of this evidence and began coordinating with law enforcement officials from neighboring counties and states. The personal documents found in the cache allowed him to identify victims from as far away as Maine and Connecticut, revealing that the Blackthorn operation had attracted targets across a much wider geographic area than previously suspected. The investigation uncovered a sophisticated network of accomplices who had unknowingly facilitated the family's crimes through legitimate business activities. Bank officials, property clerks, and legal professionals had processed numerous transactions involving forged documents and fraudulent asset transfers without recognizing the criminal nature of these activities. The family's apparent respectability and medical credentials had provided perfect cover for financial crimes that might have triggered suspicion if attempted by less credible individuals. Martha Hendricks proved instrumental in helping investigators understand the layout and operational procedures of the Blackthorn Manor. Her detailed descriptions of the basement facilities allowed Morrison to obtain search warrants specifically targeting areas that normal medical practice would not require. She also provided crucial intelligence about the family's daily routines and security measures that would prove essential for planning a successful raid. The emergence of additional witnesses during April 1845 strengthened the case against the family while revealing the true scope of their criminal enterprise. Thomas Brennan, a teamster who had delivered supplies to the manor, testified about suspicious deliveries including large quantities of quicklime, surgical instruments, and preservation chemicals that exceeded any legitimate medical requirements. His records showed regular shipments of materials commonly used for body disposal and organ preservation. Elizabeth Morse, a former domestic servant who had worked briefly at the manor before fleeing in terror, provided eyewitness testimony about the family's treatment of patients and their discussions of murder techniques. Her account described systematic patient isolation, suspicious deaths during routine procedures, and family conversations that explicitly discussed victim selection criteria and asset extraction methods. The family's response to these accumulating threats revealed their desperation and growing paranoia as their carefully constructed world began collapsing around them. Silas increased security measures around the manor while accelerating the destruction of evidence that might support criminal charges. He also began planning contingency escape routes that would allow the family to flee to Canada if prosecution became imminent. Constance launched an increasingly frantic campaign to discredit witnesses and maintain community support through charitable activities and social manipulation. However, her efforts proved less effective as mounting evidence overcame the family's reputation for respectability and community service. Former allies began distancing themselves from the Blackthorns as suspicions hardened into probable criminal charges. The children demonstrated remarkable composure despite the mounting pressure, continuing their surveillance activities while preparing for potential armed conflict with law enforcement. Marcus and Theodore had acquired substantial weapons and established defensive positions throughout the manor, while Helena focused on destroying documentary evidence and preparing portable assets for rapid evacuation. Morrison's investigation revealed that the family had been planning their eventual escape for months, maintaining substantial cash reserves and alternative identities that would allow them to relocate and potentially resume their activities under different names. Bank records showed regular transfers of funds to accounts in Montreal and other Canadian cities, suggesting they had established support networks across the border. The discovery of recent correspondence between Silas and medical institutions in Europe indicated that the family had been exploring opportunities to expand their organ trafficking operations internationally. Letters discussed potential partnerships with anatomical suppliers in London and Paris, revealing ambitions that extended far beyond their rural New England base of operations. As spring progressed towards summer, the weight of evidence against the Blackthorn family became overwhelming despite their sophisticated efforts to maintain their innocence and destroy incriminating materials. Morrison had assembled a case that included physical evidence, eyewitness testimony, financial records, and expert analysis that collectively painted an irrefutable picture of systematic murder and theft conducted over multiple years. The family's realization that exposure was inevitable triggered final preparations for violent resistance or desperate flight. They had transformed their manor into a fortress while maintaining escape routes that might allow them to evade justice even if their criminal empire finally collapsed under the weight of investigation and community outrage. The confrontation between law enforcement and the Blackthorn family reached its climax during the second week of June 1845, when Sheriff Morrison assembled a coordinated force of officers from 3 counties to execute simultaneous raids on the manor and surrounding properties. The family had received advance warning of the impending action through their network of informants, triggering desperate attempts to destroy evidence and eliminate witnesses who might testify against them. The night before the planned raid, the Blackthorns launched their most audacious cover-up operation by attempting to murder Martha Hendricks in her boarding house room. Marcus and Theodore infiltrated the building using skills they had developed during years of surveillance activities, but their assassination attempt failed when Hendricks awakened during the attack and screamed for help. The brothers escaped, but their botched murder plot provided additional evidence of the family's guilt while demonstrating their willingness to kill anyone who threatened their operation. Silas spent the final hours before the raid systematically destroying years of accumulated evidence, including patient records, financial documents, and correspondence with organ trafficking networks throughout New England and beyond. The basement surgical facilities were dismantled hastily, with equipment and preserved specimens burned in massive bonfires that could be seen for miles across the countryside. However, the family's panic led to incomplete destruction that would leave crucial evidence for investigators to discover. Constance coordinated the evacuation of portable assets while attempting to maintain the appearance of normal family activities. Her years of experience in deception and social manipulation proved insufficient to conceal the family's obvious preparations for flight, as neighbors reported suspicious nighttime activity and the movement of heavy loads from the manor toward hidden locations throughout their property. Helena demonstrated remarkable composure for a 15-year-old facing potential execution, methodically destroying financial records while preparing emergency supplies for the family's planned escape to Canada. Her organizational skills proved essential during these final chaotic hours, as she maintained operational control while her parents struggled with the psychological pressure of their collapsing criminal empire. The raid commenced at dawn on June 14 with coordinated attacks on multiple buildings throughout the Blackthorn property. Morrison had learned from the family's previous success in eliminating evidence and witnesses, deploying sufficient force to prevent escape while securing all potential hiding places where victims might be concealed or evidence stored. The initial assault revealed the full extent of the family's criminal sophistication when officers discovered active surgical operations in progress. 2 victims, wealthy travelers who had arrived seeking medical treatment just days earlier, were found restrained in the basement surgical suite awaiting procedures that would have resulted in their deaths and organ harvesting. Their rescue provided irrefutable evidence of attempted murder while demonstrating the industrial scale of the family's operations. The Blackthorns' response to the raid revealed their transformation from respected community members into desperate criminals willing to commit any violence necessary to preserve their freedom. Silas opened fire on approaching officers using rifles that Marcus and Theodore had positioned throughout the manor, initiating a gun battle that lasted several hours and resulted in casualties on both sides. During the firefight, Constance attempted to execute the 2 rescued victims to eliminate potential witnesses, but was prevented when officers stormed the basement facility before she could complete the murders. Her willingness to commit these final killings in full view of law enforcement demonstrated the family's complete abandonment of any pretense of innocence or respectability. The discovery of the basement facilities exceeded even Morrison's expectations based on witness testimony and evidence analysis. Multiple surgical suites equipped with restraining devices, preservation tanks containing human organs, and chemical processing equipment revealed an operation that surpassed many established medical institutions in terms of sophistication and capacity. Most horrifying was the uncovering of detailed records documenting 87 confirmed murders conducted over 6 years, including victim names, asset inventories, and organ sales transactions. Helena's meticulous bookkeeping provided prosecutors with comprehensive evidence of the family's crimes while revealing the systematic nature of their murder enterprise. The attempted escape during the final stages of the raid demonstrated the family's elaborate contingency planning and their determination to evade justice regardless of consequences. Theodore was killed while attempting to reach horses hidden in a remote barn, while Marcus sustained serious wounds that prevented his participation in the family's final flight attempt. Silas and Constance managed to break through the law enforcement perimeter with Helena, initiating a pursuit that would continue for several days across difficult terrain toward the Canadian border. Their escape represented the culmination of years of careful preparation, but also marked the beginning of a manhunt that would mobilize resources across multiple states and demonstrate the broader implications of their crimes for law enforcement cooperation throughout New England. The manor raid had finally exposed the full scope of the Blackthorn family's criminal enterprise while revealing evidence that would reshape understanding of organized crime capabilities in rural America. However, the family's successful initial escape meant that justice remained incomplete despite the overwhelming evidence of their guilt and the rescue of their final intended victims. The manhunt for the surviving Blackthorn family members became the largest coordinated law enforcement operation in New England history, involving officers from 5 states and federal marshals who recognized the case's broader implications for interstate crime and public safety. Sheriff Morrison coordinated the pursuit while simultaneously managing the massive investigation into evidence recovered from the manor, revealing the true scope of a criminal enterprise that had operated with impunity for nearly 7 years. The evidence discovered during the manor raid exceeded even the most pessimistic expectations of investigators who had prepared themselves for systematic murder and theft. Helena's meticulous records documented not only the 87 confirmed victims but also detailed financial transactions with medical institutions, organ trafficking networks, and corrupt officials who had unknowingly facilitated the family's crimes through legitimate business activities. Analysis of the basement facilities revealed sophisticated preservation and processing capabilities that rivaled established medical schools throughout the region. Multiple surgical suites equipped with restraining devices and drainage systems, chemical processing equipment for body disposal, and refrigeration systems for organ storage demonstrated an operation that combined medical expertise with industrial efficiency in service of systematic murder. The financial records uncovered during the investigation showed that the Blackthorn operation had generated over $60,000 in profits through murder, theft, and organ trafficking, representing wealth that exceeded the lifetime earnings of most rural families by substantial margins. Bank accounts in multiple states and Canada contained substantial deposits that would fund the family's flight while revealing the geographic scope of their criminal network. Correspondence recovered from the manor included letters with medical institutions from Boston to Philadelphia, documenting regular organ sales that had provided prestigious research facilities with anatomical specimens of suspicious origin. University officials expressed shock at learning their research programs had unknowingly supported systematic murder, leading to immediate policy changes regarding specimen procurement and supplier verification. The pursuit of the fleeing family members revealed their elaborate escape preparations and sophisticated understanding of law enforcement limitations across state boundaries. Silas, Constance, and Helena had established supply caches, safe houses, and financial resources throughout their planned escape route, demonstrating contingency planning that extended back several years before their eventual exposure. Their flight path toward the Canadian border followed carefully selected routes that avoided major population centers while utilizing terrain features that complicated pursuit by mounted officers. The family possessed detailed knowledge of local geography, seasonal conditions, and transportation networks that reflected years of preparation for this eventual necessity. The first significant breakthrough in the manhunt occurred when investigators discovered the family's abandoned campsite near the Vermont border, complete with evidence of medical treatment for Marcus's wounds and hastily discarded personal belongings that confirmed their direction of travel. Bloodstains and medical supplies indicated that Marcus had died from his injuries sustained during the manor raid, reducing the number of fugitives while providing investigators with valuable intelligence about the family's condition and capabilities. Local residents throughout the pursuit route reported suspicious encounters with travelers matching the family's description, including attempts to steal horses, medical supplies, and food from isolated farms. These incidents revealed the family's growing desperation while providing law enforcement with regular updates about their location and direction of travel. The psychological pressure of constant pursuit began affecting the surviving family members differently, with Constance reportedly suffering from hysteria and paranoid delusions while Helena maintained remarkable composure despite her youth and the traumatic circumstances. Silas demonstrated increasing irrationality and violence, threatening to kill his wife and daughter rather than allow their capture by pursuing officers. What are your thoughts on this incredible manhunt across multiple states? If you're amazed by the scope of this investigation and the family's elaborate escape preparations, share this video with friends who love historical true crime. Hit that like button to support our deep research into these forgotten cases, and make sure you're subscribed with notifications on so you never miss when we uncover these shocking historical mysteries. The family's attempt to cross into Canada was complicated by increased border security that had been implemented specifically to prevent their escape. Federal marshals coordinated with British authorities to monitor known crossing points while maintaining surveillance of the family's financial accounts that might provide resources for continued flight. Evidence suggested that the family had originally planned to resume their criminal activities in Canada or Europe, using their medical credentials and accumulated wealth to establish new operations beyond the reach of American law enforcement. Correspondence found in their abandoned camps included letters to medical contacts in Montreal and London, indicating ambitions that extended far beyond simple escape from prosecution. The discovery of additional victim remains throughout the family's property continued even as the manhunt progressed, with search teams uncovering burial sites that contained bodies in various stages of decomposition. Each new discovery added to the mounting evidence while revealing victims who had never been reported missing, suggesting that the true scope of the Blackthorn crimes might exceed even Helena's comprehensive records. The case had attracted national attention as newspapers throughout the country reported details of the systematic murders and the ongoing pursuit of the fugitive family members. Public fascination with the combination of medical respectability and systematic murder created unprecedented media coverage that elevated the Blackthorn case into a national sensation while influencing public attitudes toward medical practice regulation and oversight. The capture of the surviving Blackthorn family members occurred on June 23, 1845, near the village of Derby Line on the Vermont-Canada border, when their desperate attempt to cross into British territory was thwarted by coordinated law enforcement action that had anticipated their route and timing. The final confrontation revealed the psychological toll that 9 days of constant pursuit had inflicted on the fugitives, transforming them from calculating criminals into desperate individuals willing to commit any violence to avoid capture. Silas made a final stand in an abandoned mill building, using Helena as a human shield while threatening to kill her rather than allow their capture by pursuing officers. His complete psychological breakdown demonstrated how the collapse of his criminal empire had destroyed the facade of respectability and medical authority that had sustained his self-image for nearly 7 years. The man who had once commanded respect throughout 3 counties had become a cornered animal capable of murdering his own daughter to spite his pursuers. The negotiation for Helena's release required 12 hours of careful psychological manipulation by Sheriff Morrison, who recognized that the girl represented both a victim of her family's crimes and a potential source of crucial information about their broader criminal network. Her eventual surrender occurred only after Constance suffered a complete mental collapse that left her catatonic and unable to participate in the final confrontation. Helena's decision to cooperate with law enforcement marked the definitive end of the Blackthorn criminal enterprise while providing investigators with comprehensive intelligence about their methods, victims, and accomplices. Her detailed confessions revealed additional murder sites, financial accounts, and criminal contacts that had remained hidden despite the extensive investigation of their manor property and business records. The trial proceedings commenced in October 1845 under unprecedented security measures designed to prevent escape attempts or vigilante violence against the defendants. Public interest in the case had reached extraordinary levels throughout New England and beyond, with newspapers providing daily coverage of testimony that revealed the systematic nature of the Blackthorn murders and the sophistication of their criminal organization. Prosecution evidence included not only the physical proof discovered during the manor raid but also testimony from surviving victims, accomplices who had unknowingly facilitated their crimes, and medical experts who explained the advanced techniques used for organ harvesting and body disposal. The cumulative weight of evidence painted an irrefutable picture of systematic murder conducted with industrial efficiency over multiple years. Helena's testimony proved particularly damaging to any remaining hopes for acquittal or reduced sentences, as her detailed knowledge of family operations and meticulous record-keeping provided prosecutors with comprehensive documentation of individual murders, victim identities, and asset theft. Her apparent emotional detachment while describing systematic murder shocked observers and demonstrated the psychological damage inflicted by years of participation in criminal activities. The defense strategy focused primarily on claims of mental instability and arguments that the family's crimes resulted from gradual corruption rather than inherent evil, but these appeals for mercy proved ineffective against overwhelming evidence of calculated and systematic murder. Medical experts testified that the defendants demonstrated clear understanding of their actions and showed no evidence of mental defects that might excuse their criminal behavior. Constance's continued catatonic state prevented her participation in the trial proceedings, leading to questions about her mental competency that delayed sentencing while specialists attempted to determine whether she was genuinely incapacitated or feigning insanity to avoid execution. Her condition became a subject of national medical and legal debate about the relationship between criminal responsibility and mental illness. The revelation of the broader network of corruption and complicity that had enabled the Blackthorn operation shocked communities throughout New England as the trial exposed how respected institutions and individuals had unknowingly supported systematic murder through legitimate business activities. Banks, medical schools, legal professionals, and government officials faced public scrutiny about their role in facilitating crimes through inadequate oversight and verification procedures. Public reaction to the trial testimony revealed deep societal concerns about the vulnerability of rural communities to sophisticated criminal enterprises and the limitations of existing law enforcement capabilities in detecting and preventing systematic crimes. The Blackthorn case catalyzed discussions about medical licensing requirements, interstate law enforcement cooperation, and financial transaction monitoring that would influence policy development for decades. The sentencing phase of the trial attracted national attention as legal experts debated appropriate punishments for crimes that exceeded conventional categories of murder and theft. The systematic nature of the Blackthorn operation and its unprecedented scope created challenges for judges who lacked precedents for addressing criminal enterprises of such sophistication and duration. Helena's age at the time of sentencing created additional legal complications, as courts struggled to determine appropriate punishment for a minor who had participated in systematic murder while demonstrating remarkable criminal sophistication and apparent lack of remorse. Her case influenced subsequent legal frameworks for addressing juvenile participation in adult criminal enterprises. The broader implications of the Blackthorn case extended far beyond individual criminal justice concerns, as the systematic nature of their crimes and the sophistication of their methods forced recognition that American society faced new categories of criminal threats that existing institutions were inadequately prepared to address or prevent through conventional law enforcement approaches. The final sentencing of the Blackthorn family members on December 15, 1845, marked the conclusion of the most extensive criminal trial in New England history while establishing legal precedents that would influence American jurisprudence for generations. Silas Blackthorn received the death penalty for his role as the primary architect of systematic murder, becoming the first physician in American history to be executed for crimes committed under the guise of medical practice. Constance's mental condition remained a subject of medical and legal debate throughout the sentencing proceedings, with specialists unable to determine conclusively whether her catatonic state represented genuine psychological collapse or elaborate deception designed to avoid execution. The court ultimately sentenced her to life imprisonment while mandating continued psychiatric evaluation, establishing precedents for addressing mental competency in capital cases. Helena's sentence proved most controversial, as legal experts struggled to balance her youth against the sophistication of her criminal participation and apparent lack of remorse for systematic murder. The court ultimately sentenced her to 25 years imprisonment with the possibility of parole, recognizing her status as a minor while acknowledging her essential role in facilitating the family's criminal enterprise through meticulous record-keeping and financial management. The aftermath of the Blackthorn case triggered sweeping reforms throughout New England's medical and legal institutions as communities recognized the vulnerabilities that had enabled systematic murder to continue undetected for nearly 7 years. Medical licensing requirements were strengthened significantly, mandating more rigorous background investigations and ongoing oversight of practitioners, particularly those operating in isolated rural areas. Financial institutions implemented enhanced verification procedures for property transfers and estate settlements following revelations about how the family had systematically stolen victim assets through forged documentation and corrupt official cooperation. Banks throughout the region adopted new protocols requiring multiple witnesses and extended waiting periods for transactions involving deceased individuals or suspicious circumstances. Law enforcement agencies established improved communication networks for sharing information about missing persons and suspicious deaths across state boundaries, recognizing that criminal enterprises could exploit jurisdictional limitations to avoid detection. The Blackthorn case demonstrated the necessity for coordinated investigative capabilities that transcended local authority structures. Medical schools throughout the country revised their anatomical specimen procurement policies following revelations about their unwitting participation in organ trafficking networks that had supported systematic murder. New requirements mandated detailed documentation of specimen sources and supplier verification procedures designed to prevent future exploitation by criminal enterprises masquerading as legitimate medical suppliers. The discovery of additional victim remains continued for months after the trial concluded, as investigators systematically searched properties throughout the region where the family had conducted business or maintained connections. Final victim counts reached 93 confirmed murders, making the Blackthorn operation the most prolific systematic murder enterprise in documented American history to that point. Community healing proved challenging for residents of Ashford County and surrounding areas, as the revelation of systematic murder within their midst forced recognition of their collective failure to detect or prevent crimes that had claimed nearly 100 lives over 7 years. Many families struggled with guilt about their unwitting complicity in facilitating murders through social acceptance of the Blackthorn family and referrals of vulnerable individuals for medical treatment. The economic impact of the case extended far beyond immediate investigative and legal costs, as property values throughout the region declined significantly due to the area's association with systematic murder. Tourism and economic development suffered for decades as the Blackthorn name became synonymous with medical horror and criminal sophistication that challenged public confidence in rural community safety. Helena's imprisonment generated ongoing public fascination and debate about the nature of criminal responsibility, moral development, and the possibility of rehabilitation for individuals who had participated in systematic murder from childhood. Her case influenced emerging theories about juvenile criminal justice and the long-term effects of exposure to criminal environments during psychological development. What do you think about this chilling conclusion to one of America's most horrific family crime stories? If you've been captivated by this deep dive into the Blackthorn family's systematic murders, share this investigation with others who appreciate dark historical mysteries. Hit that like button to support our research into these forgotten cases, subscribe with notifications on to never miss our shocking historical revelations, and let us know in the comments what other buried secrets you'd like us to uncover from America's hidden past. The long-term legacy of the Blackthorn case influenced American attitudes toward medical authority, rural community vulnerability, and the potential for systematic criminal enterprises to exploit social trust and institutional limitations. The family's ability to maintain respectability while committing nearly 100 murders demonstrated that evil could present itself in forms that challenged conventional assumptions about criminal behavior and community safety. Modern forensic experts who have studied the Blackthorn case recognize it as a landmark example of organized criminal enterprise that presaged many characteristics of 20th-century systematic crime, including sophisticated victim selection, methodical evidence destruction, and exploitation of jurisdictional limitations to avoid detection and prosecution. The B.L. Blackthorn Manor was demolished in 1847, but the legacy of systematic murder conducted within its walls continues to influence discussions about medical ethics, criminal justice, and community responsibility for protecting vulnerable individuals from exploitation by predators who manipulate social trust and professional authority to facilitate systematic crimes against humanity.